Welcome to the Bible and Science. This is Dave Prentice. I'm a retired public high school teacher, certified in all branches of science and math. I've also taught on the Bible and Science for many years, both in the U.S. and on many overseas mission trips. This is episode number 34 of the Bible and Science. Last time I talked a bit about some of the things you can see that are manifestations of the information in DNA at the visible level, that is the macroscopic level. We're going to continue dealing with those things today. Biogeography is the idea that as things move across from one geographic location to another, they're similar but not exactly the same. So this is supposedly one of the pillars of evolution. No, it's not a case of evolution at all. Biogeography is a case of specialization, not evolution. The genes are there before you even start the process. Evolution requires new genes to appear for the very first time. This is not what happens in biogeography. All it is specialization. Last time I talked about how there could be a population of birds that would radiate outward from a founder population. Well, that's all that you see with biogeography. The kind is radiating outward from a founder population, and this results in the elimination of certain genes. They're filtered out in different areas by environmental conditions. No new genes are appearing. The farther the kind moves from the founder group, the more specialized the subgroups become. There are no new genes that are added, many are lost. So biogeography offers no explanation for where the founder population got its genes in the first place. Let me keep reminding you about arguments for design. If you have an opinion, you say, oh, that's so beautiful. That just doesn't carry much weight at all. But if you are finding something that's extremely improbable, but it's in a specific pattern, for instance, Dr. Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, he talks about a groundhog. In the South where I live, we would talk about an armadillo. There's no theoretical barrier that says it's impossible for one of these little critters to make it across a busy 1,000-lane superhighway. They just won't. If you have a 1 in 2 chance, 50-50 chance of making across any one line, well, by the time you're at 10 lanes, you're about 1 in 1,000, 20 lanes, 1 in a million, 30 lanes, 1 in a billion, and so forth. So you couldn't say it's impossible for the critter to make it across a 1,000-lane superhighway. You just would recognize, no, that's not going to happen. So here's some extreme improbabilities. The Galapagos Islands, they're an isolated chain of islands that are roughly 600 miles off the Pacific coast of Ecuador. Darwin had a job as a naturalist on HMS Beagle. That was sort of like Spock on Star Trek. Darwin was the naturalist. He noticed that there were many highly specialized groups, including marine iguanas, tortoises, penguins, and finches, and he considered those as evidence for evolution. Now, Darwin got a lot of his ideas from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, so he already believed in evolution before he set out on his voyage. But the evolutionists believe these islands, the Galapagos, they're volcanic islands, that they're only a few million years old. So since the genes of each type of animal would have taken far longer than just a few million years to evolve, each of them must have come from a founder population which already possessed the genes before they migrated there from somewhere else. The Galapagos animals and plants are excellent examples of specialization, but they have nothing to do with the evolution of new types. There are no new genes that don't exist elsewhere. The primary example that Darwin relied on, and many others do, are the finches of the Galapagos Islands. There are different islands. There are dozens of islands in the Galapagos chain. Some have classified the finches living on those islands into 13 different species based on beak shapes. Well, that's incorrect. A species is a biologically isolated unit, so the members can only reproduce with each other. At least a few of these types are able to interbreed. That means they're the same species. All 13 of the groups that have been called species on the Galapagos possibly may be variants within a single species. Each of the beak shapes on the islands matches well with a specific food source, such as certain types of seeds. If a food type increases due to weather and other environmental circumstances, the finches that have beaks that match with that type of food prosper. If the food supply diminishes, they tend to die off. And when the circumstances return to normal, so do the percentages of each beak type. This was the case in the Galapagos Islands some years back, where somebody said, oh, look at the evolution going on. There's no evolution going on within the finch population. And in Australia, there's a similar situation. Monotremes are the only known egg-laying mammals. There are no living or fossil transitions leading up to them. In fact, there are monotremes found in the fossil record around the world, not just in Australia. So they didn't develop in Australia. They were just apparently eliminated in other locations besides Australia. Now, exactly what the reason is, well, that's a matter of speculation. But then also there's a group called marsupials. These give birth to partially developed young, which crawl inside the mother's pouch and then nurse until they're fully developed. So there are some Australian environments that are unique in that continent, but other of those environments occur at various places around the world. There are marsupial equivalents of many other types of animals: mice, cats, deer, wolves, badgers, moles, flying squirrels, rabbits, and so forth. They're marsupial equivalents of the ones found in the rest of the world, but they're not considered close relatives. It's a different order Marsupialia. The opossum is the only living marsupial found native to areas outside of Australia, but there are many fossil marsupials found around the world. So why am I saying that the change of size, the beak size and things like that, is not evolution? Well, let me give you a plausible political example. Suppose there was an insane dictator, a short guy. He's sensitive about his height. He orders everyone in his country taller than himself be killed. So what would happen to the average height in his country? It would immediately decrease. But as soon as he died or was thrown out of office, the taller children would no longer be eliminated. Within a few years, the average height in his nation would return to its former level. Well, during the time where the average height was less, somebody might say, oh, look at the evolution. And then when the taller kids started to live again because he died, oh, look at the evolution. No. Likewise, the change in the average beak size during the droughts in the Galapagos Islands occurred only because the finches with the larger beaks died off. So what happened to the average beak size? Got smaller, because you were eliminating, or nature was eliminating, some of those with the larger beaks. But when the droughts ended, the larger beak finches began to thrive again, and the average beak size returned to its original level. Evolution requires the appearance of new genes, not just the elimination of old ones. Here's something that is sometimes used erroneously to indicate evolution. Skin color. Within the human species, Homo sapiens, all humans except for albinos have the same skin pigment, which is called melanin. Its concentration is believed to be determined by 3 gene sites. If you have more dominant genes, you're going to have more melanin and darker skin. So looking at the chart, going across, that's the mother's contribution, and the vertical part is the father's. So the number of dominant genes is shown in blue. Okay, if you have all of the dominant genes, then you're going to have very, very, very dark skin. The people with the darkest skin in the world are probably the Dravidians of Southeast Asia, around India and so forth. They're really, really, really dark. Does that mean they're in some way less evolved? No, of course not. If you've acquired all 6 dominant genes from both of your parents, you're going to be very, very dark-skinned. But then if there's some combination of genes where you get 5 dominant, you'll be a little bit lighter, 4 dominant, a little bit lighter, 3 dominant, a little bit lighter. And you can see that basically there are going to be about 6 major skin shades within the human species. Now, I'm not including albinos, so you could say 7 major skin shades. And if you look around, you'll see from the extreme light to extreme dark, yeah, there's a little bit of variation because of the amount of sunlight you're exposed to and things like that. But there's not that many distinct skin shades within the human species. It's because one set of parents with all of the alleles way back at the beginning, Adam and Eve, they could have children with many different amounts of dominant genes, all the way from 0 with albinos to 6. That's 7 different particular groupings. The skin shades would range from extreme light to extreme dark, and they would all be brothers and sisters. So think about Adam and Eve. In order for them to be able to furnish all of the different skin shades, all of the gene combinations for skin shades, I'm sorry, racists, they probably would have been sort of a medium brown, considerably darker than me, considerably lighter than some of the darkest skinned people in the world. So we would look at them and we wouldn't identify them as white people, despite all of the things that you'll see in the Sunday school materials. It's very unrealistic. They would have been probably a medium brown shade. According to Genesis, where did the races come from? Adam and Eve had all of the different alleles for the amount of melanin. We all came from not just Adam and Eve, but further on, Noah's sons and their wives. At that time, all of the genes would still have been present within the human gene pool. Until the Tower of Babel, people were freely interbreeding, so their genes would not have become sorted out. They wouldn't have been sharply defined groups. Now, at the Tower of Babel, God said, I'm going to separate all of these people into groups according to language. God is the one that chose who was going to speak what language, using modern equivalents, Swahili and Bantu and English. Of course, there was no English back then. God is the one that decided which people would speak which languages. I would think that it would probably be according to the genes. God knows not only the number of hairs on your heads, but what are your genetic contents in your DNA. So after the people separated by language, they were no longer interbreeding. When I've been in foreign countries, I listen for people that speak English. I don't care what their skin shade is. I want to be able to communicate with somebody. So I think that God chose these are going to speak this language, that's going to involve with other languages and so forth. So this would allow clearly defined groups to develop very quickly. If all of the people with the dark skin genes spoke similar languages, they would tend to cluster together. The people with the light skin genes would tend to cluster together. It's not anything having to do with superior or inferior races. Natural selection wouldn't have caused the grouping, but it would have reinforced it. So the groups that we call races, they're just large extended families within the human species, the human race. There's only one race, the human race. So the fact that there are different ethnic groups with different skin shades is a visible reminder that God will not allow mankind to unite in rebellion against him. He stopped it at the beginning. He's going to stop it again. But if your mind is made up, you're not going to let me confuse you with the facts. Many, many, many atheistic biologists say, nah, there's no possibility but evolution. This is Francis Crick, who was co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, won the Nobel Prize for it. He said biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they see was not designed, but rather evolved. Why do they have to keep that in mind? Because you look around in nature and it surely does look like things were designed. So what's the probability that all of these things happened leading in the same direction? Well, my mind is made up. Don't try to confuse me with the facts if you're an evolutionist. But is it normal to search for design? Yeah, that's a normal part of science. Anytime an airplane crashes, the National Transportation Safety Board comes and investigates this to see whether it was an accident or whether maybe somebody sabotaged the flight or a mouse chewed through the wires or something like that. Likewise, investigation of arsons and suspicious deaths. The medical examiner is going to look to see, is it designed or is it accident? If you're looking out in space, SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, these guys are looking to see, is there something out there that indicates the probability of design? That's a normal part of science. And then one time I took a very interesting biology class, an ecology class. We went along anthills. We went along levees next to bodies of water, looking to see how high up above the ground level were the anthills. Was it something that seemed to be randomly distributed or not? Well, we concluded, based upon probability, chi-squared distribution, that the distribution of the anthills was not random. We didn't know why it wasn't random. We statistically were just able to calculate this doesn't seem to be random. Well, you can do that throughout science. You can look to see whether something is likely to be designed or whether it's more likely to be random. These are some of the things you're going to have to come up with an answer for according to evolution. Are these random or are these pointing together in the direction of non-randomness? Well, do we have any sort of a natural explanation for the origin of matter and energy, how it could have come into existence? Nothing produced everything? No, there's no scientific explanation for that. That's philosophical. People that say it just popped into existence by itself, okay, it's a made-up story. How could a Big Bang have worked? Have you heard of the Big Bang Theory? There's not a Big Bang Theory. There are many, 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 many models. None of them is testable, so none of them counts as a theory. There's a bunch of different models of evolution, but each one contradicts all of the other ones. Where did the chemical elements come from? We have to make up a story about that. That was a much earlier episode talking about all of the elements besides hydrogen and helium could not be produced by any known process. They just had to be there. Well, okay. How would an orderly universe develop from a disorderly explosion at the time of a Big Bang? That's something we don't have an answer for. We have to look at the probability. How would the stars have come together after a big bang? It exploded, and then parts of it clumped back together billions and hundreds of billions and trillions of times the stars. How did the solar system come together? Is that something that would have happened strictly by accident, or is it an improbable thing? The origin of life. That was one of the earlier episodes, how life is essentially impossible. It can't happen as a result of natural processes alone. To me, that says, oh, okay, there's an intelligent intervention here, God. And then why do we have the ability to reproduce? Why do we have DNA? Why do we have our RNA? At the beginning of life, there wouldn't have been any of that. It's supposed to have evolved by accidental copying mistakes that slip through the prevention mechanism that's designed to prevent accidental copying mistakes. And then all of the living things known use only left-handed amino acids in their proteins, and they use only right-handed sugars in their DNA. What's the probability that you could have, say, 300 billion nucleotides in the DNA of something like a lily, and every single one of them depends on right-handed sugars, no left-handed sugars? Even us humans, we only have 3 billion base pairs. What's the probability you would get 3 billion that are all of the same and not one of the others? It's like flipping heads on a coin 3 billion times in a row. Would you expect that that's likely to be the result of an accident? And then there's a copying mechanism going on, and there are error prevention mechanisms. So do you believe that that's something that would lead to increased genetic information by copying mistakes that were not prevented? Irreducibly complex structures, which I've touched on a number of times, and we'll be getting to more of them throughout nature, and the origin of every major type of living things. Is that something that can be explained by purely natural processes by very high probability? The origin of sex, the origin of humans. We'll talk about the fossil record in later episodes. The origin of consciousness, morality, humor, many other things. Could these be the result of random chemical processes just pointing all in the same direction? I don't think so. But evolutionists can make up stories about any particular thing you can come up with. And since they can make up a story, we're still supposed to shut up and believe that the stories are true. So is the concept of intelligent design unscientific? Well, intelligent design is a broad concept. It allows for the possibility of direct creation or theistic evolution. Not everybody believes in biblical creation as I do. But there have been a great many judges nationwide that bought into the claims of atheists that since the presence of a designer can't be tested, therefore intelligent design is unscientific. Can I prove the existence of a designer? No. No scientific proof for that. I can make an argument, which is what I'm doing on this series. But the judges who keep saying, no, you can't teach intelligent design in schools, they overlook an obvious question. Okay, if you can't scientifically prove the existence of a designer, here's the other question. Can you come up with a scientific test to prove the non-existence of a designer? No, of course you can't. Intelligent design, or the lack thereof, is something that you have to say, what's the more reasonable explanation? So in what way is teaching the impossibility of intelligent design any more scientific than teaching the possibility of intelligent design? It's not. They're both philosophical, where you look at all of the arguments and you say, this is more reasonable, it makes sense to me. To me, it's more reasonable based upon the improbability of each step that There must have been intelligent design, that is God, behind all of this. Here's a few more things that go against the possibility of just randomness. Nature tends toward equilibrium. That is, energy flows from greater to lesser concentration. This is called the second law of thermodynamics. It's probably one of the best demonstrated laws in all of science. If anything is proven, this one is. So nature tends toward equilibrium. As a result, water is going to flow across a membrane in osmosis to try to equalize the concentration of chemicals on both sides of the membrane. So the water is trying to equalize the concentration of chemicals. Yes, but plants do exactly the same. Their roots contain a mechanism, enzymes, and so forth, that allow them to seek out specific elements from the soil, like iron and manganese. If you have an iron deficiency, you can't just go out and eat a bunch of dirt to get the iron you need. It's not in a form that your body can use, but the plants will capture it and put it into a form that you can use. So plants have an active transport mechanism. They seek out specific elements from the soil, allowing them to reach a concentration of those elements that can be perhaps 10,000 times as high as the concentration of the elements in the soil. That's not what natural processes produce. That's the opposite of going toward equilibrium. The chemicals are brought together into a very, very high concentration rather than spreading out into a low concentration. The only reason that active transport happens in plants is because the plant's DNA has the instruction encoded to produce the specific enzymes. Similarly, suppose it's a hot day and you want to drink something. So you're up on a roof and you have a metal straw that won't collapse, and you put it down into your nice cold drink 40 feet lower. You can't get anything up that straw. Water goes up a straw not because of suction, but instead because of atmospheric pressure. The atmosphere is pushing on the surface of the water, and when you evaporate the gases from the straw up above, then that allows the water or whatever you're drinking to go up the straw, but it's because the atmosphere is pushing it up. The highest column of water the atmosphere can support is about 32 feet. So if you watch the weather reports, they'll talk about how many millimeters of mercury, but it's the equivalent of about 32 feet. If I totally remove any gases above, the maximum it's going to climb to is about 32 feet. Now you can push it up with a pump, but a vacuum can't support more than about 32 feet. So that would mean that natural processes would limit the growth of trees to about 32 feet tall. Yeah, the problem is some of them grow to well over 100 feet. How does water get up to the top? As I said, you can pump and overcome the limitation. Trees have pumps. They don't rely on atmospheric pressure. They don't rely on a vacuum to suck the water up. They rely on pumps. Why are those pumps there? Because the DNA has the coding instruction to produce those things. It's not because natural selection forces them to evolve. They go exactly the opposite way. Well, let's think about something that we would consider simple, a bacteria. There are a great number of bacteria that swim by means of propellers called flagella. These things rotate. They're driven by reversible electric motors. So go look in Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, and you'll see some of the details. But these motors go through a double membrane. They have bushings. They have an outer membrane. They have studs, stator, C-ring, rod, S-ring, rotor. All of these things are there because the DNA of the cell has the instructions necessary to put them there. So when the motors, which are individually reversible, when the motors run one direction, that's going to propel the cell forward. When they go the other direction, it's going to stop moving. It'll be stationary or go the other direction. This is a very common thing that you'll see in many bacteria in nature. Some of them only have one flagellum. Some of them have up to 6 flagella. My thanks to Dr. Richard Lumsden, a late friend of mine who was a PhD in cell biology. And you can see the details of this in the book Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe. So I'll save until the next time some of the things, some other things that are indications of design. We'll talk about climbing gobies that can swim up against a waterfall. There are a number of other topics that I do intend to talk about the indications of design in nature, besides the sea creatures that, well, many sea creatures and land creatures. We'll get to those starting in the next time. Still a lot more to go.